If I'd have made this video a year ago, you probably wouldn't have even considered clicking it. That was probably partially down to me, but also probably down to the fact that at the time, Liverpool weren't quite the team that we know now. Things weren't going quite as well, and someone like Joe Gomez was considered a fringe centre-back backup for Liverpool rather than the player that we've known him to be this season and the player that maybe we saw him as before. Why is that unfair on Joe Gomez? Because since then, and even before then, he put in the work, he put in the graft to be so much more than that. And he was probably massively underappreciated just purely because this Jurgen Klopp team was motoring at a different speed before they tripped themselves up and got into the position they were last season, which has continued into the position we are this season. And, you know, the down became an up. You don't know you're in a peak until you're on the way down. You don't know you're in a trough until you're on the way out. Joe Gomez has embodied so much of what is good about Liverpool, making their way out of those troughs, and so much of his experience and even just everything that's gone on around him embodies a lot of what is good about this Jurgen Klopp, but also just Liverpool squad right now. And someone like Joe Gomez is going to be so key to the future of Liverpool. And I'll tell you why. This 26-year-old who came from London is probably one of the players that we'll need to look out for over the next couple of years, and why we should also be celebrating him getting into this England team, despite the fact that really as Liverpool fans, we probably don't care all that much about Joe Gomez or any Liverpool player getting into the England side. We signed him all those years ago from Charlton, actually in 2014, transfer made in 2015, he transferred in 2015, and he was only transferred for £3.5 million. Of course, he was a much younger player back then. If you go back a decade, which is a decade from now, Joe Gomez is only 16 at the time, right? Joe Gomez is now 26, still young for a centre-back, still young for anyone with this level of experience. And that's why I think it's kind of weird that actually they list him for £20 million pounds here, because you think if Joe Gomez was to be put on the market by Liverpool, the amount of other Premier League teams, just European caliber sides, that would jump at the opportunity to sign Joe Gomez for I think about 30 to 40 million, probably possibly even more at this point, is insane. But we don't know what his transfer value is, and we probably don't want to find out what his transfer value is. The point being, Liverpool got him in an absolute steal, and he was bought from Charlton. Liverpool have had quite a lot of luck with South London players, particularly Charlton players. And when he first came in, he did look very different. That skinny little Joe Gomez with his different haircut and his different look, and it was such a different time in Liverpool's history. This is a kit that I remember so well, and actually I really loved. But weirdly, like, it feels just so alien now to look at these players. Anyway, let's go through some of how he's changed at Liverpool. I think that's what's key here, right? 2015-16, which is when I'm going to go back to, just purely because, you know, it's worth it. Look at him playing left back, basically, for Liverpool. Now, this is probably because Liverpool didn't actually have anyone who immediately jumped out as a particularly aggressive left back. Joe embodies a lot of the things that Liverpool want to embody under Jurgen Klopp, but also just the modern centre-back / defender. There's aggression, there's tenacity, there's great game reading. He's really strong. He is very good going forward. He's got a good ball on him. He's got a great cross on him. His combination play is really good. He's able to filter back when he needs to. He's able to move forward when he needs to. And you can see it here. Like, and you know, I'm not saying that he played every game of the season for us, but he played enough that we can judge that that's where Liverpool saw his immediate future, at least, because Virgil van Dijk, or whoever was strong enough on that side of the fence, wasn't Virgil van Dijk back then, was probably going to get ahead of him. It was probably Mohamed Saka, it was probably Lovren. Both those guys, much more senior players, much bigger, built a lot more like a centre-back would have been built back then, rather than now. It's kind of weird. And Joe Gomez was seen as this young guy breaking through, probably because he was still very young. Didn't get to play all that many games, but the games that he did play, there were a couple of impressive ones, and then obviously the Manchester United game. Of course, at that time, Manchester United were actually, they were a better team, but also, you know, the rivalry was a bit more bitter because neither of us was sort of at the very top of our game. It wasn't a pleasant time to be a Liverpool or a Manchester United fan. And then weirdly, you see Joe Gomez shift, right? So look at this 17-18, well, I mean, this is a huge part of it, right? He got a massive injury, an anterior, I think it was, cruciate ligament injury, which for some people is career-ending at that time. And it took him a whole season to recover from that. Now, a lot of teams, a lot of clubs probably would have moved on from Joe. A lot of teams, a lot of clubs probably would have, you know, done the rehab and then just seen where he was at. Probably underestimated him a little bit and then moved on to some other sides. Liverpool didn't do that. It's particularly Jurgen Klopp and that his staff didn't do that. They brought him back in. He was shifted to right back, very different role for him. And sometimes there was like a centre-backy type role, but it was basically much more conservative defensively. Joe Gomez was very much trusted in that position. Obviously, alongside a very solid centre-back pairing at that time. He didn't actually play all that many games that season, I don't think. And, you can see here, like, obviously, it's kind of scatty, the amount of games he plays. 22nd January, 30th of January, March, April. Like, he's not had the consistency in the team at that time. And you can understand why. He's still working his way in. He's still a very young player for Liverpool. And there were just other senior players around who probably were ahead of him and probably fitter than him, frankly, at the time. At this point, we're looking at 18-19. He's shifting a bit more centrally. There is a lot more for Joe Gomez to do. There's a lot more that we're appreciating about Joe. He's sort of growing into his body at this point fully. He will be alongside Virgil van Dijk at this time. And, well, just look at that. Like, there is a real player coming through at this point. And you can clearly see that Jurgen Klopp and his playing staff appreciate what it is that Joe Gomez can do. But it wasn't until this season, the 1920 season, when Joe was pretty much playing week in, week out, getting the games under his belt, doing the things that he loved to do, where we're looking at Joe Gomez as Joe Gomez. This is a season where he announced himself, I think, as a centre-back. And you could probably argue that he did that before that as well. This was probably another season where we're thinking, okay, what have we got in our hands here? But look at him, like, he just looks so different to that younger self. He still looks like quite a young player. His head shape is still quite different. He's not quite a man yet, but he is a massive stature player. And I think Liverpool at this point are looking at someone that they can consistently keep alongside Virgil van Dijk, even if Joe Gomez doesn't particularly fit the profile of player that Liverpool and particularly Jurgen Klopp wanted then. I think he wanted more of a Matip type. I think he wanted someone who was just going to meander out with the ball a little bit more, be a complementary player in a different way to the way that Joe Gomez was complementary to Virgil van Dijk. But his career is building out at this point. He's clearly the B-side to Virgil, but Virgil is clearly teaching him a lot. There is clearly a lot to Joe Gomez's game in terms of the way he plays it out, in terms of in fact, he had a lot more touches per game back then than he does now. In fact, I think he has about a third less touches in the games that he plays now. So there is a difference in the way that Joe Gomez plays. And of course, I think a huge part of that is down to the fact that Liverpool played slightly differently back then. So here we are. Look, this is the 2021 season again. Joe Gomez playing all over the place, having to fill in a little bit for a couple of players. There are injuries here and there. Here and there, more than here and there, but you get what I'm saying at this point, where Joe needs to fill in quite a lot. You see his heat map shifts more centrally. And I think this was probably one of the seasons that we saw, hey, like, not only is this guy a quality centre-back, but the quality of character, the quality of person, the quality of mind, the fact that he's got enough time now away from that cruciate ligament injury that we see Joe Gomez coming into his own, really just turning into the Joe Gomez that would probably be appreciated now. But it's still clear that I think Virgil van Dijk is still the number one. We're still looking for a number two more consistently, even if he did win a title for us. Don't forget, this is a guy who was so consistent during that title season. I think he missed about 10 games all season in the Premier League for us. A lot of really impressive performances, and he was part of a run that I think will probably go unrivaled for quite a while by any Liverpool side, let alone a Premier League side. 21-22. I think at this point we're starting to see that Joe we've seen the factors that bring Joe into being a great player, but we've also seen a lot of other good players coming in, and you can clearly see there is a hierarchy at Liverpool at this point. Joe's having to get minutes here and there. You see it's kind of scatty where he's playing in terms of dates. He's really just getting games when other people are injured or when we want to shore things up, or, it's a different time actually in football, weirdly. Like, centre-backs, it was much more full-backs on the outside, centre-backs on the centre, and Joe Gomez hadn't quite fit into either profile for Jurgen Klopp. So it's not that he wasn't good. It was just, I think at that point we were seeing there were great profiles in Robertson and Trent, probably Matip, and probably Virgil van Dijk, just unattainable in terms of those Liverpool players at that point. It's clear Liverpool are moving in a specific direction, and it looks tricky for Joe at this point. But then Joe comes back in, and I think the 22-23 season, difficult one, but it was a horrible season, actually. But the point being, right, Joe Gomez at that point, it was kind of like, hey, what can he do here? Matip's injured all too often. Is Konate going to come through? What is it that he's going to do? Can we bed him in? Is he going to appreciate the system? Can he work with the press? All these kind of things. Clearly he can. But we had to learn these things. But it was these games specifically, where I think a lot of people, particularly me and a couple of other guys, thought, how much further can Joe Gomez really go in this team? I remember watching the guys warm up I was away in Naples, it was the Champions League, there was a lot of confidence around this team, and Napoli, who were a great side at that point, took us apart. Look at that. That stadium is really, really impressive. And it was an overawing environment. Joe made 2 really big mistakes, if not 3 really big mistakes on that night, and it made it really difficult for Liverpool to get back into the game. Napoli were intense, Napoli pressed us, Napoli were horrible. We didn't know how good they were. I think this entire Liverpool team underestimated them, and even the atmosphere that you can see here was one that I don't think Liverpool were particularly... They were, at this point, underestimating teams. We didn't know the decline at that point that was coming during the season, and again, I think it took an incredible amount of mental fortitude just to get through that game for this Liverpool side. You can see both ends. I was sitting with the Napoli fans at this point. They were clearly just jubilant. And it was pretty wild, actually, to watch Liverpool on that night. I think we were so hopeful as fans. I went with a good friend of mine, Glenn. We were so hopeful, and we didn't know what was to come that season. And the recovery that we would need to show in this time, the recovery that we would need to go through, and the humiliation that we partly went through that season as a fan base, people sort of going, oh, you're not as good as you thought, all those kind of things, was beginning to frustrate us. And you could see that there was a bit of, what is going on with this Liverpool team? Are we rebuilding? Has he been too loyal to people like Gomez and Henderson? There were massive question marks over some of these guys. But at that point, Joe had got his new contract, I think, or at least he was in the works. And I think Klopp knew what was going to be rebuilt at this point. I think Klopp knew that Joe Gomez would be for the future, and that actually we needed a more adaptable centre-back. Come the 23-24 season, and look what's happened here. Joe has gone from barely being in the centre, unless he's inverting, which obviously he's done more recently, which everyone appreciates, into being more of a, well, we've not needed him so much on the right because of Conor Bradley, but more on that left, being able to fill in at centre-back when he needs to, having touches and being really big on set pieces for Liverpool. And these were the things that I think we were really questioning about him. There were a couple of times, and there still are a couple of times, where Joe misplaces a pass and it didn't need to be misplaced. There are a couple of times where you look at him and go, right, what could we have built up better here? But Joe has really done a great job of remodeling a lot of his game under Klopp, and I think it shows he's adaptable enough for the next manager to come in and mould him into what he wants him to be if he sees that kind of player in him. And look at the Europa League here. He's clearly playing in an inverted, right-sided role. He played in the 6. He's playing in all sorts of roles that really he shouldn't be playing in for Liverpool, because I think a lot of people would have sold him ages ago. A lot of people wouldn't have appreciated a huge part of his game. He showed himself driving through midfield, winning the ball back, able to appreciate being a 360 player in that central position, whereas before you probably wouldn't have given him a chance at centre-back with, that part of the pitch to look at. Now he's got to look at the whole pitch. And he'd become a leading player in this Liverpool team. There's 7s, 8.5s. He barely ever drops below a 7 now. For Liverpool. Like, on this app, that is really good as a rating, and his average rating is 7.3 this season. Now, obviously, that's because we've had a lot of wins, but the point is, Joe's profile has changed a lot in this time. Look at how that heat map changes while he's at Liverpool. Left-sided, very much right-sided, centre-back, right-sided, centre-back, left-sided. That adaptability is so rare. He's become an almost James Milner type figure for this Liverpool team. And the frustration that we had about him even a year ago has begun to melt away, if not completely melted away. He's played in big games for us. He's proven he is a leader. He can fill in at centre-back. He's clearly a player that the other young players look up to, not only the players who've just come through, but the players who've gone through injuries. Joe seems like the kind of teammate that you want. He's got a great personality. He's a very consistent personality. Isn't the kind of person to disrupt anyone else, should we say, but also the whole dressing room. And just look at him. If I'd have shown you this image of Joe Gomez a year ago, I'm not sure you would have believed that it was there. I think Joe might have. I think a few people in the team knew his character. But frankly, I think a lot of other people didn't. And he was a huge part of that drive for the quad. He was a huge part of the drive for the title. He was a huge part of the drive for the Champions League. All the things that Joe has done have been massively underappreciated at his time at Liverpool. So I just want to take a minute just to appreciate what Joe Gomez has done. Look back at that story a little bit. Look at some of the struggles that he's been through. And remember, just highlight to a few people, it's not always been sweetness and light, roses for Liverpool. There's been a journey we've been on, and I think it's difficult when you are going for a title to remember those terrible moments. You're so in the moment. You're so involved in it. You love it so much. And what Klopp and these guys have done is very special. But in particular, when you look at the journey that some of these guys have been on, you see the actual ups and downs of the Liverpool that we've seen and the Klopp that we've seen, and how the faithfulness of some of these players has actually paid off. So don't forget that when you're looking at Joe Gomez. It's not like we've just signed a brand new player. This is a guy we signed for $3.5 million. Maybe there were some low and add-ons, but $3.5 million. The value that we see in this side, I know we've spent however much on Konate, and Matip was a free, but Joe Gomez signed a new contract for a reason, and he's deserved this England call-up. Not only could he play right, left, or central midfield, a few months ago, I think a lot of people were just going, that's something that only someone like John Stones could do. Only a couple of centre-backs could do that. Joe has shown an adaptability that I think, Pep gets praised for doing this with a lot of his players. Joe is kind of going under the radar, and I'll finish on this. I think Joe is destined to score a goal for Liverpool. I think he's destined to score a goal for someone. He's never scored a goal in his career. And it's kind of become a bit of a cliche. Klopp doesn't like it when we get on his back or kind of, joke about it now. That's kind of the point with Joe, is like, Liverpool feels so comfortable with him at this point. We know there is something coming. We feel like he's part of our future to such a great degree that we're not pressuring that. We're now joking about that. That's become a bit of a cliche since, I think it was Drury said it on the commentary on Sky Sports, and that's become a bit of a stick to beat him with. I look forward to him scoring his goal, whether it's now, whether it's the end of the season, whether it's in the FA Cup final, whether it's in the FA Cup. I'm just looking forward to that moment when we can give our appreciation back to Joe Gomez. And I hope you are too. Let me know in the comments below your favourite Joe Gomez moment, what else you think it is that he embodies to you. I just told you what he is to me. And I'd love to do more of these kind of individual player profiles on the channel. Let me know what you think, and I'll chat to you guys again later. Much love.